It was a moment that was entirely unexpected. On the bright and early morning of May the 26th, 1990, 40-year-old Marlene Warren and her son were busy making breakfast in the kitchen when, all of a sudden, they heard an unexpected knock at the front door. The two were not expecting anyone, so who could this be? Well, after leaving the kitchen and walking to the front door, Marlene opened it to see something very bizarre. It was a clown, but this was no ordinary costume. With vivid colours, orange hair and red nose, the clown stood there with flowers and two balloons, with one of them saying, "You're the greatest." And Marlene, well, she was definitely baffled, but also open to surprises. And so she responded with, "Oh, how pretty." By now, Joe had joined his mother at the front door, but unfortunately, and unknown to him at the time, this would leave him with a terrible memory for the rest of his life. In a single movement, the clown reached into the folds of their costume and produced a gun. But before Marlene or Joe could even react, they then pulled the trigger, striking Marlene at point-blank range. Frozen in horror, Joe watched helplessly as the clown turned around and calmly walked away, while his mother started bleeding out on the floor. Unable to grasp the horror of what had just occurred, he watched on as his mother desperately tried to cling on to her life. Meanwhile, the clown returned to their vehicle, which was a Chrysler LeBaron with no license plates, before then driving away. A neighbor, who was alarmed by the sound of the gunshot, then dialed 911. First responders arrived within minutes, transporting Marlene to Palms West Hospital. But sadly, despite their response, her injuries were notably severe, and that bullet that had struck her, well, it had lodged itself into her spinal cord. Marlene fought for her life for 2 days in hospital, but sadly, the damage was all too extensive, and on May the 28th, she sadly passed away. This tragedy was one of the most bizarre and violent cases to ever shake the Wellington community. I mean, you may expect to see a clown at your front door over Halloween, but not in the middle of summer, and definitely not with a loaded gun. And the crime scene itself would plague officers with confusion, even more so when they were left wondering who would want Marlene dead. She was an extraordinarily kind woman, and definitely had no enemies. And to add to that, this mystery would compound itself over time, and although it would eventually be solved, it would take many decades to get there. In fact, this case would update itself as recently as 2 weeks ago, and although we have had one guilty conviction already, I do really believe that we have more to see in the future. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, folks, and welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime. My name is Adrian, and today we're looking at Florida's infamous killer clown. Now, as many of you know, I like to keep my stories uninterrupted, so before we begin today, here is a quick message from this video's sponsor and partner, MyHeritage. MyHeritage is the #1 family history service that helps you find new family members and records of your ancestors with very little effort. As you can see, it is so easy to build your family tree and discover your origins. With my family roots spanning multiple countries, I was curious to see what I'd find. And with more than 20 billion historical documents on MyHeritage, I was able to travel all the way back to 1815 and learn that my great-great-great-great-grandfather was Richard Woodward. Rather interestingly, the Woodward family surname comes from Woodland Warden, which actually means protectors of England's ancient forests. It appears that they all lived in the Greater Manchester area, and records show that my great-great-grandparents got married in St Elphin's Church in 1854, which is just a stone's throw away from Cheshire. After that, and only 2 generations later, my grandmother moved to Canada. My father then moved to America, where eventually I was born. By the way, while you wait for your results, you can also use this cool AI photo feature, where you can colorize and enhance your old family photos and even animate them if you'd like to. Learning about my family history has, quite honestly, been so interesting. Now that I've moved to the other side of the world, MyHeritage has helped me feel closer to my family and all of those before them. Use the Instant Discoveries feature to potentially add an entire branch to your family tree. With MyHeritage's many features, you will likely be surprised by the results. If you found this interesting, then why not give MyHeritage a try? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen and get a 14-day free trial. Thank you so much to MyHeritage for sponsoring this video, and thank you to you folks for supporting us content creators. And now, with that said, let's get back to this case. And so, please grab a coffee and get comfortable, folks. We're about to examine the life of Marlene and the killer clown lurking in her shadows. This is the case of Marlene Warren. Born on April 15th, 1950 in Michigan, Marlene was raised in a middle-class family by her parents. As she grew older, she eventually moved to Florida, where she carved out a life of comfort and success on her own. Those close to her described her as a kind, loving, and generous woman who knew how to get things done. She was also a very compassionate person, that's for sure. On the topic of love, Marlene would meet her first husband, John Aarons, in her teenage years. After marrying, they would have 2 sons named John Jr. and Joseph Joe Aarons. It is worth noting here that Joseph Aarons was with her at the time of the shooting. Now, sadly, her first marriage with John would ultimately end in divorce. At the time, Marlene was still very young and ambitious, and so her determination did not stop her to go on to tackle new adventures and find another man. And this is precisely what would happen, because this was when she would meet her second husband, Michael Warren. Michael was a relatively successful businessman in the local area, and with Marlene's headstrong and proactive nature, the couple would go on to establish a very comfortable life together. Between the two of them, they built a rental estate portfolio in the local area, and all in the meanwhile, Michael would build a second business in vehicle mechanics, which he named Bargain Motors. By the age of 37, Marlene was managing the rental property empire they had built together, all while the 4 of them were living in the exclusive Wellington Aero Club community in Florida. Aptly named Takeoff Place, the Aero Club community was a very prestigious area. As you can imagine, it's a neighborhood built around a small runway, and perfect for all of those small plane enthusiasts. I mean, just taking a look around here, you can see how beautiful some of these homes are. However, tragedy struck in the autumn of 1998 when, all of a sudden, Marlene's older son, John Jr., lost his life in a car accident, and, quite understandably, this destroyed her and his younger brother, Joe. Following John Jr.'s sudden death, both Marlene and Joe would support one another as they tried to cope with their substantial loss. She poured all of her energy into supporting Joe and maintaining a stable household as he carried on with his education. But, as some of you will know, pain this deep really can poison the rest of the colourful parts of your life, and Joe and Marlene, they were left drowning in their own dark waters. Through this tragedy, cracks slowly began to form in Marlene's and Michael's marriage, and with reports of him allegedly having an affair, well, their marriage certainly was on the rocks. However, before Marlene and Joe could even make peace with the loss of John Jr., or she and Michael could even repair their marriage, Marlene was murdered by a clown in a suit. Before investigating the case, detectives initially surveyed the entire community, interviewing not only neighbors and acquaintances, but distant connections too. It is safe to say that the unusual nature of the crime really did throw detectives off of their usual process. I mean, a killer dressed as a clown who then seemingly vanished without a trace. Well, that was sure to leave the community rife with speculation and fear. So, was this a professional hit or a personal vendetta? The truth is that nobody knew for a very long time, and the once quiet and secure neighborhood was now gripped with fear. As a result, people locked their doors, watched each other cautiously, and anxiously awaited answers. Quite honestly, it is quite interesting to see how a community treats itself when an unknown killer is on the loose. In the absence of solid information, rumors began to spread, therefore filling gaps and fueling fear and fascination as the list of potential suspects grew. So, on that note, let's begin with the prime suspect, as I know many of you will have already thought about it. And of course, we're talking about Marlene's husband, Michael Warren. Initially, the investigation focused solely on him. Although Michael was a successful businessman and also a car dealer, questions about his character and personality and potential motives slowly began to surface. I mean, rumors had long swirled around his infidelity, particularly around a former employee named Sheila Keene. Both friends and employees had often observed Michael and Sheila together, not merely at work, but outside of work hours too. And so many suspected that maybe their relationship went beyond professional. To add to this, family and friends shared that Marlene had actually once confided in them about her own concerns with Michael. In fact, she had even once told her mother, "If anything happens to me, Mike did it." Those who knew her quite well also speculated that Marlene had been considering divorce, which in the grand scheme of things could then jeopardize Michael's own control over their shared assets. This would have included all of their very important assets, including their real estate empire and their car dealership. So, with this in mind, investigators did wonder if financial strain or an affair could have possibly driven him to eliminate Marlene. But Michael would maintain his innocence, and no evidence ever connected him to her murder. As investigators dug into Michael's business dealings, there was another angle that emerged. It was noted that his aggressive tactics used within the car dealership had earned him both allies and enemies outside of his business. As a result, and mainly due to the allegations of unethical practices, many competitors and customers harbored deep resentment towards him. You see, Michael did all sorts of shady shit when it came to vehicles. Things like meddling with the odometer and even committing multiple acts of insurance fraud. One business rival would even accuse Michael of staging a car theft to damage their company. So, could Marlene have been murdered by Michael, or was she targeted in a more significant vendetta against him? Well, despite this line of questioning, no clear evidence linked any former business associate to her murder. Oh, and speaking of business associates, we haven't yet talked about Michael's rumoured mistress, Sheila Keane. As a repossession agent working at Bargain Motors, she would often interact with Michael on a day-to-day basis. The other employees who worked there would also note that their relationship appeared to be suspiciously close. Close enough to suggest that perhaps the two of them had been having an affair. In addition to this, witnesses would report seeing Sheila at a costume store shortly before the murder. They would also observe that this costume was that of a clown, and one that was very similar to what Joe described on the day of his mother's murder. All of this was certainly worth investigating by officers. And coupled with her alleged affair with Michael, Sheila quickly became a key suspect. However, as the investigation progressed, those leads against her would slowly begin to fray, and unfortunately, investigators struggled to connect any of the suspects directly to the crime. And so, despite Michael's potential motives, Sheila's questionable behaviour, and Michael's many enemies, no evidence was available. However, that would be until one breakthrough discovery. Along a lonely road, officers found a clown costume inside an abandoned getaway vehicle, that being a white 1986 Chrysler LeBaron, which was the exact match to the one seen when Marlene was murdered. Detectives observed several synthetic orange fibers on the clown costume, leaving behind a potential way to tie the evidence to the killer. Now, naturally, this was massive news for detectives, but unfortunately, forensic technology was still primitive in the year 1990, therefore leaving no key suspect attached to any findings. And so, as weeks turned into months and eventually into years, the case of Marlene Warren would slowly lose momentum. Eventually, her friends, family, and the entire community were all left wondering if the truth would ever surface. And what began as a chilling mystery ultimately turned cold. And so, Marlene's case went eerily silent after that, and for many years, this killer clown remained elusive while detectives struggled to understand her death. And with this story being so wacky and out there, well, it is quite understandable why this became one of America's most notorious cold cases. In the meantime, life continued for Marlene's loved ones, and this was particularly pertinent for her husband, Michael. You see, despite his close connection to Marlene and her murder, he really did seem to move on surprisingly quickly. And this raised a few eyebrows not only in her family, but in the police force too. And how about that alleged affair that he and Sheila were having? Well, as it turns out, that was not actually just a rumor. In fact, by the year 2002, they were married. After this, the couple then left Florida and started a new life together in Abingdon, Virginia, far away from the long shadow of Marlene Warren's murder. After arriving and putting Michael's business skills to good use, they then decided to open a burger joint called the Purple Cow. Blending into a small-town life with a sense of anonymity, the Purple Cow allowed them to construct new identities and purpose. However, for Marlene's family, friends, and all who knew her, the absence of justice remained unbearable. Her younger son, Joe, who had witnessed her murder firsthand, struggled for many years with trauma, anger, and the haunting image of her final moments. In the minds of those who knew and loved Marlene, justice was long overdue. But without any fresh or new evidence, her case would gather dust instead among a long list of cold cases. In fact, many began to wonder if they would ever see her killer held accountable. Now, I really do love this analogy, but time has a way of compounding even the smallest of details. You see, over time, one small ripple can eventually cause cataclysmic waves. And in the year 2014, one tiny event would do just that for Marlene's case. Advances in forensic science prompted Palm Beach County's cold case unit to reopen her file and resume the investigation. This means that detectives revisited old evidence, including the hairs and synthetic orange fibers found in the abandoned getaway car. At the time of the original investigation, forensic technology could not definitively link the fibers, hairs, or suspects together. However, with advancements in the forensic field, investigators now had a new opportunity and way to solve the mystery. And guess what? The DNA results were groundbreaking. When the analysis returned, it was determined that the hairs and the fibers matched those of Sheila Keene, therefore confirming all suspicions that she was definitely involved in Marlene's death. The rumors of her affair with Michael, which led to their eventual marriage, and now the forensic evidence between them, well, this was shaping up to be a perfectly flawed murder story. As a result, on September the 26th, 2017, and nearly 27 years after Marlene's murder, Palm Beach County investigators traveled quietly to Abingdon, Virginia to make their arrest on Sheila Keene Warren. It has to be said that the arrest which took place would shock the local community just as much as it stunned her. Neighbors were left deeply surprised and in awe. They couldn't believe that the local woman who flipped burgers at the Purple Cow was now suspected to be the primary killer of one of Florida's most infamous cold case murders. As for Marlene's family, the arrest was both a relief and, of course, a painful reminder of their loss. And although this was very welcome news, it brought all of that trauma back nearly 3 decades later. As Sheila waited for her trial to begin, details of the investigation and her life with Michael would resurface, of course rekindling public interest in the case yet again. Moving into her trial, court documents revealed that Sheila had purchased the clown costume and the balloons only a few days before Marlene's murder, with witnesses coming forward from a local costume shop to identify her as the purchaser. And after combining the DNA findings and her now already married to Michael, the case against her was very strong. Now, personally, I don't see why this couldn't have happened before DNA advancements, but I suppose it's better late than never. Despite maintaining her innocence, Sheila was now facing a growing mountain of evidence, and also the possibility of life behind bars. However, what I would argue is probably the most shocking part to all of this is that despite his almost undeniable involvement in Marlene's murder, Michael Warren would actually ultimately evade all charges. This is just so hard for me to comprehend, because if he really was innocent and really did love Marlene and had an inkling that Sheila had murdered his wife, well, he would have run for the hills and definitely not marry her. But instead, not only did he opt to entertain the affair, but he then married Sheila, moved to another state with her, and then started a whole new reclusive lifestyle with her. In my eyes, this guy is not innocent. In April of 2023, and facing overwhelming evidence, Sheila Keene Warren pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. In exchange, she received a reduced sentence of only 12 years, bringing an official close to all legal proceedings. For Marlene's family, Sheila's admission did offer some form of closure, but the outcome was bittersweet. By now, nearly 3 decades have passed, with lives changed forever and Marlene still gone. As Sheila accepted her sentence, people hoped that the story of Marlene's murder had reached its final chapter, but unfortunately, it wouldn't end there. On November the 2nd, 2024, or just 2 weeks ago if you're watching this video as soon as it was posted, Sheila Keene Warren was officially released from custody. Not only that, but it turns out that Sheila and her attorney still claim that she did not commit this crime. Instead, she now claims that she chose to take the plea deal rather than risk a potential life sentence behind bars. So, plea deal aside, what exactly happened to her sentence? Well, Florida's sentencing laws promote something called gain time, which tends to shave off time of a person's sentence if they are on good behavior. Although Florida now requires that people serve at least 85% of the sentence after gain time, Sheila is immune to this change in law as the murder occurred before those changes took place. This means that from the time she was arrested in the year 2017 until the day she was released in 2024, Marlene's killers have only served a total of 7 years behind bars. So, what can I say? This reminds me of the Caitlin Markham case, and is yet another tragic story which displays a lack of accountability. Not only was this story ultimately tainted with disappointment, but it was also marked by mystery, secrets, and never-ending tragedy. And while Sheila's conviction would eventually end the so-called mystery behind the killer clown, the sad memory of Marlene Warren will endure forever. She is remembered not for the horror of her death, but for her kindness, resilience, and dedication to her family instead. Marlene was a compassionate, hard-working woman known for her warmth and devotion to creating a stable, loving environment for her children. After the tragic death of her oldest son, she became even closer to Joe, who, after losing his older brother, was only 21 years old when he lost his mother too. Her sudden and tragic death left a void that has haunted her family for many, many years. And although Sheila's eventual conviction did bring some sense of justice, it was ultimately short-lived. The only hope we now have is that perhaps one day, Michael Warren will eventually be found guilty too. Personally speaking here, but I have no idea how Michael managed to get away with Marlene's murder. If I were to hazard a guess, I think that he probably fell out of love with his wife, but the two were both attached legally through the business, and so there was no painless way out for him. You see, Michael and Marlene were in it together over this real estate empire, and so if he did decide to divorce Marlene, well, she would have the right to 50% of all money and profits. And Michael, well, if the affair didn't make it obvious enough already, he was a very greedy man. So maybe he decided that the best way forward was simply to murder Marlene so he could keep all of the money and profits for himself. But Michael did not want to get his hands dirty, and that's where Sheila comes in. If he were to offer her some of the money that he would have lost, then maybe she would have agreed to do the work for him. Anyway, that is just a potential theory and merely an opinion. Not even mine actually, there are plenty of people that think this online. But before I go today, I would love to know what you think about this. And so, what do you think happened here? Do you think that Sheila really was guilty of murdering Marlene? Do you think that Michael was the mastermind behind it? And if not, then who? As always folks, please do share your thoughts in the comment section down below because I genuinely am interested in this one. There are just so many potential theories here, and yeah, I mean I know this case is more than 30 years old, but I really don't think it's over yet. Oh, and by the way, I've put a lot of thought into the next video which comes out next week. I've changed the structure around and experimented with a few things to try and keep the channel fresh. And so please do watch that one and let me know what you think. And thank you again to MyHeritage for sponsoring this video. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to get a 14-day free trial. Just a reminder that I have a Patreon, and so if you want to get early access to my videos or to support me in the channel, then please check it out. I've recently bought a whole bunch of new equipment for the new studio, and so if you are a member of my Patreon, you're directly contributing to more videos coming out. And by the way, thank you to all of you who already are members. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to follow me on my adventures or simply see more pictures of Nero, then please check out my Instagram too. Anyway folks, that is pretty much it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, I really do appreciate your company. As always, I'll see you again very soon for another video, and like I said, next week is rather special, so please do tune in. Until that moment arrives though, remember to look after yourself, look after each other, and of course, stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.